Plot summary of Blood Brothers by Willy Russell. The story of Mickey and Edward Johnstone, twins who were separated at birth and died on the same day, is told by the narrator at the start of the musical Blood Brothers. Next, we meet the twins' mother, Mrs. Johnstone. She is a poor woman whose husband left her after she had 5 children and was expecting another. She talks about how her husband used to take her dancing and make her feel like Marilyn Monroe. Now, though, her life is a never-ending cycle of bills she can't pay and kids who are hungry. She works at the home of Mrs. Lyons, a rich woman who wants a child of her own. When Mrs. Johnstone finds out she's having twins, she's very upset. She doesn't have enough money to feed 2 more mouths. Mrs. Lyons, however, offers to take one of the twins, but only if Mrs. Johnstone swears on the Bible to never tell anyone about their deal. The narrator says that bad things will happen next. Soon after, Mrs. Johnstone has a baby boy. When Mrs. Lyons takes one of Mrs. Johnstone's twin boys, the poorer woman complains about all the debts she's had to pay. When she gets back home, she tells her kids that one of the twins has died. Mrs. Lyons gets jealous and suspicious when Mrs. Johnstone goes back to work because she thinks Mrs. Johnstone is giving too much attention to the new baby. She then fires Mrs. Johnstone, and when the cleaning lady tries to give the baby back to Mrs. Johnstone, Mrs. Lyons tells Mrs. Johnstone a lie that will kill her. She tells Mrs. Johnstone that if 2 twins who were separated at birth ever find out where they came from, they will die right there. Mrs. Johnstone is scared, so she agrees to keep their secret. The narrator warns that the devil will punish the 2 women one day. Mickey, the twin who stayed with Mrs. Johnstone, grows up in a rough environment over the next 7 years. Edward grows up in the lap of luxury. When he was young, he thought Mrs. Lyons was his mother. When they were young boys, they met by chance and became friends right away. When they find out they have the same birthday, they decide to become blood brothers and work together to stop Mickey's older brother, Sammy, from being mean. Mrs. Johnstone is horrified when she finds out that the 2 have met, so she sends Edward away. Mrs. Lyons gets even more angry and thinks about uprooting her whole family to run away. Even though their mothers don't like it, Mickey and Edward keep seeing each other. We see the 2 boys play with their other friend, Linda, in a series of games that involve guns. The 3 of them pull a lot of pranks, which gets the attention of the police, who threaten Mrs. Johnstone and try to make Mr. Lyons feel better. Even though Edward isn't excited about it, Mrs. Lyons uses this time to move her family to the country. Before Edward leaves, Mrs. Johnstone gives him a locket with a picture of her and Mickey in it so he can always remember them. The boys are lonely without each other, but the first act ends on a hopeful note. Mrs. Johnstone's family is also moving to the country, which she hopes will keep her children from living a life of crime and filth and help her forget the mistakes she has made in the past. At the start of Act 2, 7 years have passed, and the boys are now 14 years old. Both of them are interested in girls, but they don't know what to do about it. Mickey and Linda, on the other hand, are clearly in love with each other, but Mickey's lack of self-confidence has kept them from getting together. This mostly peaceful beginning is ruined when Sammy, who is now a full-fledged juvenile offender, tries to rob a bus. Mickey and Edward both have trouble at school. Mickey insults a teacher, and Edward won't take off his locket even though it's against the rules at his fancy boarding school. When Mrs. Lyons finds out he disobeyed her, she is shocked, and when she sees what was in the locket, she is even more upset. Again, the narrator comes back to remind Mrs. Lyons and us that the devil will come at some point. After his date with Linda didn't work out, Mickey sees Edward and wishes he could be smooth and cool like that guy. On the other hand, Edward wants what he thinks of as Mickey's freedom. When they see each other, they are happy to see each other. The 2 decide to go see a pornographic movie together. They head to Mrs. Johnstone's house so Mickey can get money, but they don't know that Mrs. Lyons is following them. Mrs. Johnstone is shocked and happy to see her son after a long time. Mrs. Lyons comes out after the boys leave. She says that Mrs. Johnstone stole Edward's love, and that her son was never hers to begin with. She gets angry and uses a kitchen knife to hurt Mrs. Johnstone. She is eventually disarmed, but before she leaves, she curses Mrs. Johnstone and calls her a witch. Before deciding to spend the summer together, the boys meet Linda and get into another trouble with the police. Then comes a happy part where the three friends go from being 14 to being 18. They enjoy the joys of youth and summer, but the narrator warns them that soon, both their happiness and their childhood will be over. Edward, who has feelings for Linda and is now 18, is going to college, while Mickey is working in a factory. With a little help from the selfless Edward, Mickey asks Linda to be his girlfriend, and she says yes with great enthusiasm. Mickey tells Mrs. Johnstone in October that Linda is pregnant and that she and Mickey will be getting married. But right around the time of their wedding, the economy takes a big hit and Mickey loses his job. By the time Edward comes back for Christmas, his friend has been through a lot and is feeling sad and worn out. Mickey tells Edward that he is still a child and doesn't know anything about life. He says that the idea of blood brothers is just kid stuff. Edward, who was turned down, finds Linda and tells her he loves her. He leaves when he learns that she has married Mickey and is pregnant. Mickey agrees to help Sammy break into a house because he is poor and needs money. When the crime goes wrong, Sammy kills someone, and he and Mickey are sent to prison. Mickey gets sad while he is in jail, so he is given antidepressants that are very addictive. Even though his mother and wife beg him to stop, he keeps taking the pills after he gets out. In the end, Linda is so desperate that she asks Edward, who is now a city councilman, to help her find an apartment and find a job for Mickey. After Mickey gets angry about her efforts, Linda turns to Edward for comfort and starts having an affair with him. Mickey decides to stop taking his pills for Linda's sake while he and Linda are having an affair. He gets off track when Mrs. Lyons, who is completely crazy, tells him about Linda and Edward's affair. Mickey, who is angry, finds a gun and goes to talk to Edward. He is followed by a sad Linda and Mrs. Johnstone. The narrator tells us that the devil is here. When Mickey finds Edward in the town hall, he accuses him not only of having an affair, but also of being the secret father of his child. Edward denies this. As Mickey keeps pointing the gun at Edward, Mrs. Johnstone comes in and tells the young men the truth, that they are twins who were separated at birth. Mickey is thrown off by this news, though, because he realizes that he could be living Edward's life. As he waves the gun around wildly, he shoots and kills his twin by accident. The police then shoot and kill him as well. The play ends with this horrible and bloody scene, and the narrator wonders if superstition or the British class system really killed the twins.
About the author. The child of a working-class family whose father struggled with drug addiction, Willy Russell has a varied past. He worked at a folk club, taught, and even ran a hair salon. After making an impression with his writing at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, Russell began writing musicals, plays, and TV scripts. Blood Brothers, which he refers to as a Liverpudlian folk opera, premiered in 1983, and then moved to the West End, where it won the Olivier Award for Best Musical. Russell has continued writing since that time, and has even expanded his range to include novels and albums. He lives in Liverpool with his wife Anne. They have 3 children.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.